Maybe 2.5 years back, I met a chick at a bar. She had been stood up, and I had just knocked off for the day. I didn't go there with any idea to score. I just wanted a couple of pints to help me unwind. I'd been there around 45 minutes when the bartender slipped me a note. It was from a girl sitting at the end of the bar. She asked me to grab a table with her so we could talk. My curiosity was piqued, so I looked to my right and locked eyes with possibly the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. I thought maybe I'd been given the note accidentally. No way a girl that hot was interested in me. To make sure, I pointed at the note and mouthed, "Was this for me?" Then I pointed to myself. To my amazement, she nodded yes, and that's where our evening began. I grabbed a quiet table in the corner and she joined me. We introduced ourselves before getting to the small talk. Her name was Amber and she was 25. Close up, she was even more beautiful. I asked her why she'd written the note. I was genuinely curious. While I'm not a walking mess, I was nowhere near her level. The possibility I was being tricked came to mind, so I asked if I was being pranked, but she said no. It wouldn't be the first time. My friends seemed to think it was funny any girl would like me. They put notes on my windshield at least twice, pretending to be from a secret admirer. I never fell for it. I'm far smarter than they think I am. This, however, looked to be a real encounter. If it was, I was going to play it all the way through. The getting to know each other continued another hour until she asked if I wanted to take her home. I jumped on it, and we walked the few blocks to my apartment. We had a few more drinks and started messing around. I don't kiss and tell, so I'll just say we enjoyed one another's presence for the rest of the night. When I awakened the next morning, she's already gone. I wrote it off as an amazing dream and went to bed. When I came out, a pair of beer bottles caught my eye. I walked over to get a closer look. One had lipstick residue on the mouth. I still wasn't completely positive. I walked over to the bed and sniffed the pillow opposite mine. The wonderful smell threw me back to the previous evening. There was no doubt. It had really happened. I was over the moon for a long time. I hoped to see her again. I went as far as asking some employees if they knew how to find her, but none did. As time went by, however, I wrote it off as a one-night stand. I began dating a new girl, a wonderful, fun chick to be around, but Amber stayed in the forefront of my mind. This new relationship never really went anywhere, and we ended things a few months in. Being newly single, I hoped to track Amber down and maybe pick back up where we'd left off. I returned to the bar and asked around again. I got the same answer. I didn't have the money to hire a detective, and without a last name, I couldn't do a search on the internet. Providence would arrive in the form of CRAIGSLIST. I was browsing the site and came across the Missed Connections section. It looked to be just as good as any other avenue, so I made a short description of our night together and how I'd like to meet again. I posted it and went on with my life. All was quiet until about day 8. A message came from someone claiming to be Amber. I asked a few questions. They knew all the answers and even added things no one else could have known. I was overjoyed to be talking with her again and asked if we could meet for drinks. She agreed and suggested the place we first met. It sounded perfect, almost romantic. I started to believe this may actually go somewhere. My months-long search was over. For the rest of the week, my stomach was in knots. I was counting the hours. Saturday eventually arrived, and I made my way to meet her. She was visible from outside and more beautiful than I remembered. I joined her at the table, and the night went much as it had our first evening, all but one thing. Throughout the evening, she checked her phone many times. I assumed she was just nervous and tried to ignore it. It was a few hours before she suggested that we go back to her place. I've been looking forward to this for months. On our way out, I visited the bathroom. As I walked out, I noticed she was fiddling with her phone again. However, now she was making a call. I didn't care. Besides, maybe she was calling a roommate. She was basically a stranger to me. For all I knew, she had kids. Once again, I really didn't care. She'd hung up by the time I returned anyway, and we made our way to her car. I stumbled my way down the street until she pointed at this plain 4-door sedan, and I shuffled up to the passenger door. She unlocked it, and I fell into the seat. We closed our doors, but Instead of starting the car, she just sat there and smiled at me. Oh, she wants to make out. The idea perked me up. When I leaned over to kiss her, a strange male voice told me to stop. What? I was so drunk I had a difficult time assessing the situation. I turned my head to the back seat and saw a large, masked man pointing a gun at me. Don't make me shoot you, cowboy. Instantly, I sobered up. I could tell he meant every word. I looked over to Amber. Our eyes met, and I knew I'd been tricked. They were cold, lacking any empathy. I was devastated. I'd lost my desire to live in that moment. Moving much faster than I should have, I yanked my wallet from my pocket and threw it into the back seat. I think my nonchalance caught the man off guard. He said nothing, even as I stepped from the car and slammed the door. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood mute, staring at the pavement. It remained quiet for around 30 seconds until I heard the car start and speed away. It wasn't long before I had a massive adrenaline dump. The seriousness of what had occurred mere moments prior hit me like a truck. I hunched over and actually began vomiting. Massive amounts of booze and nachos poured from my guts. I eventually ran dry and returned to my feet. I wiped my mouth and made my way home. I wanted nothing but to sleep and didn't even bother to undress before falling into bed. Most of the day was gone when I woke up. I chugged a bottle of Gatorade, my hangover cure. The events of the previous night became clearer by the second. I felt so stupid. All the time I'd wasted looking for her. Then I got angry and my desire for revenge kicked in. A quick shower and a 2-mile walk later, I found myself filing report. In Chicago, stick-ups generally don't get much attention. When the detective handed me some mugshots, I got the idea I'd stumbled into something a tad more serious. I was shocked to see the faces of Amber and her accomplice staring back at me. I pointed them out. When the detective handed me some mugshots, I got the idea I'd stumbled into something a tad more serious. I was shocked to see the faces of Amber and her accomplice staring back at me. I pointed them out, and the detective gave me the lowdown. Only at that moment did I realize just how lucky I'd been. According to him, I had fallen prey to a scam. Amber's real name was Shannon, and she'd been a career con artist. The pair had been targeting single men for the last 6 months or more. I was thought to be their 5th victim, and the previous 3 had actually been killed. And I felt a shudder through my body. The detective was unsure why I'd been allowed to live, and that made 2 of us. Perhaps our history made me too much of a risk. Maybe she'd been pressured into doing it by her partner. I'll probably never know. It was hoped that I had new information to give him, but I ended up being no help. We spoke a little longer before he sent me home. Now I was even more confused. I was happy to be alive. On the other hand, however, I wondered why I'd been spared. I have one particularly funny theory that they didn't consider $23 and a maxed-out card worth killing over, but the truth is, it's not really a joking matter. Things wouldn't get any clearer when Amber's accomplice was arrested. He'd be brought in on unrelated charges, only to lawyer up the second he was asked any questions. He'll stay mum more than likely, even when presented with the possibility of execution. The detective on my case thinks Amber probably won't be caught for a long time, and even if she is, she'll go the way of silence too. If and when she is caught, I hope I can get a few minutes alone with her, not because I wish her any harm. I've come to terms with her role in the crime. Instead, rather, I'd like to ask why I was spared when others weren't. I'd like to think it's because we'd made some type of connection on an emotional level. Then again, that's probably just my romantic side thinking out loud. In truth, it probably just wasn't my time.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel and is essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
I want to preface this by saying, despite changing names and the use of a throwaway, everything else I write here is 100% true. Although I myself am not the subject of the story, I'm choosing to stay anonymous because of the stigma related to the content found within. A stigma I happen to agree with, by the way. Now, with that out of the way, here are the facts. I have a friend I've known since grade school. Because of difficulties he has with advanced math, he wasn't allowed to graduate. A foolish state law, in my opinion. Therefore, he left school our senior year. Lacking a high school diploma frustrated his ability to acquire any good work. Despite his clearly high level of intelligence and experience with computers, he had to settle with a job at the local transfer station or dump for the less savvy. It's the place the trash trucks drop off their loads and trailers take the garbage to the landfill from there. I know more about trash than I care to know, clearly. No one has to tell you about the large amount of waste taking place in our culture. And because of this waste, my friend, Robert, we'll call him, saw an opportunity to make extra money. He noticed a lot of old computers were being thrown away. Since he was well versed in the field, he got an idea. He began bringing discarded laptops and towers home to repair. Not all, in fact, most of them were junk, but a few proved to be unexpected gems. At first, he only sold on eBay, but because of the rising cost of shipping, he moved most over to CRAIGSLIST. In no time, he was well known in the area as a top-notch computer builder. I'd wager 50% of the laptops in the county came from him. As a matter of fact, I'm writing this on a computer he actually gave me. And because of this reputation, he was making more than enough to quit the job at the dump. They would have cut him off from his supply, or at least added an extra cost he didn't need. And so he stayed on. My reason for writing brings us to April this year. Robert had come across a pair of HP laptops, one of them almost new. He chose to keep the older model for daily use. He just recently sold his after being offered a price too good to refuse. It was a super-duper decked-out laptop someone had used for video production. As usual, it was found at the transfer station, like all the others. The newer of the pair was only 2 years old and didn't appear to have any problems. This would make selling it that much easier. His usual process was to go through a computer and remove anything not on it at the time of sale. He was performing a primary search of the new HP and came across a password-protected file. This piqued his curiosity. Yes, sometimes computers had a password required to log on, but he'd never seen a single file protected, not on any he'd found. Many of us may use a password on our banking or tax files. This was what Robert assumed he discovered. It had to come off regardless, so he did his thing and cracked it. And what he found sickened him. Since I'm aware some reading this may be survivors of this type of assault, I'll try to be as brief as possible. 5 gigabytes of CP is what it was. Not all of it was intimate in nature either. He said there looked to be some beatings, even some snuff. And this is where I come into the story. Robert called me, terrified and crying. He described what he found and promised he only watched enough to verify what it was. I believed him, naturally. He's the last guy I'd think to look at that garbage. But anyway, he continued sobbing, promising he didn't download it. I did the best I could to calm him, but he was obviously terrified. When he eventually chilled a little, we talked about his options. We agreed the police needed to see it. The problem was how to give it to them. Just having that stuff is illegal, whether it's yours or not, so I came up with the safest idea I could. Robert considered it a moment and agreed. After first wiping his prints from the laptop, he wrapped it in Christmas paper and taped a note explaining the situation at the top, minus his name, of course. He drove out to our mall and walked into the police station located inside. To avoid being identified, he wore a plain black hoodie and mask. We hoped he'd fit in because of the whole quarantine situation, and when no one was looking, he set the computer on the counter and walked away. Unfortunately, a cop caught him on his way out. Once they saw the note and the contents of the laptops, his fears came true. Countless hours of denials did no good, and news of his arrest spread quickly around town. A bail hearing was held, but the amount of $50,000 might as well have been $1 million. This means he's stuck in jail for the foreseeable future. In a larger town, I imagine his life would be in danger, but the few times we've spoken, he's claimed to have had no problems. I can only hope it stays that way until we can clear his name and get him out. The guilt I carry for suggesting the stupid plan is part of why I'm telling the story. I'm also livid because of the lies we are raised to believe. Honesty is the best policy. This may be the biggest lie ever sold to man. Tell me why a decent, hard-working man is in jail for doing the right thing. He discovers proof of a horrible crime taking place and tries to leave it with the authorities. What does he get for this? You may say, but he tried to do it in a deceitful way. You are correct, but what course of action did he have? Just having that evil in your possession is a crime no matter what. What happens when he tells the truth? No one believes him, that's what. Why would anyone do what he did if they were guilty? Now my purpose may be becoming clear. It is a lesson, a horrible example of why honesty is not always the best policy. I want the next person who finds himself in the same spot to know he benefits in no way by doing the right thing. The damage was already done to the victims when it was made. Nothing you can do can alter that. Just delete it and go on with your life. You're not a bad person, only thinking pragmatically. If only Robert had known that then, he would be free today.
I remember it like it happened yesterday. Meanwhile, it happened almost 8 years ago. I had finally been able to get a gaming PC for myself and switch over from consoles. That meant I had a PC that still worked fine, but was just sitting to the side and collecting dust. So I decided to sell it on CRAIGSLIST for a really cheap price, just to get it out of my apartment. After a few days, I found someone who was interested. He said that he worked at a golf course that wasn't too far from my house, so we made plans to meet up on the next day that he worked. The day came, and I loaded the computer and the monitor in the passenger seat of my car and made my way to the golf course. As soon as I pulled in, I saw a man who was wearing a red polo like most of the other employees, and he flagged me down since he knew the car I was driving in. I pulled up next to him and let him take a look at the computer. He said he liked what he saw, handed me the $65 that we agreed on, and I was ready to head home. As I got in my car though, he pulled his phone out and reacted as if he got some bad news. He looked at me and told me that his mom couldn't pick him up from work and that he was going to have to walk home with the computer. I asked where he lived, and he said it was right around the corner, so I told him that I could give him a ride and hop in. At first, he seemed a bit weary. I don't blame him, but in the end, he decided to go for my offer. He led me in the direction of his house, or so I thought. As we headed down a road, I noticed that there were no houses. Something wasn't right. It was like he could tell that I was growing suspicious. The man quickly pulled a yellow box cutter out from his shorts pocket. It was at that moment that I realized that he wasn't wearing a name tag like the other employees, meaning he was just dressed like one. I had been fooled. He told me to pull over. I begged him to not do anything. I would cooperate. He took my phone and my wallet. I asked him if he wanted my keys, and that was when his whole attitude changed. He looked at me and began screaming. He swung the box cutter at me, and at first I thought he missed. I didn't feel anything at all, but then I felt the warmth on my face. He had cut right across it, and blood had begun to pour out. I passed out, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in an ambulance. Apparently, someone who had been walking their dog found me laying on the side of the road after the man had forced me out and taken my car. I ended up needing 27 stitches, and I have a scar that never lets me forget that day. If there's one thing to take away from my story, it's that even if you're in between jobs, always vet the place that is hiring you. I had been looking for fresh work as a landscaper and found myself in the job section of CRAIGSLIST, and to my luck, I was able to find a few solid clients that needed work done. I had begun work for all of them, and everything seemed great. The only issue was that one client clearly had a problem. They were hooked on substances. What kind? I can't be sure. But he was always having people come by so that he could pick up his product. I should have cut ties then, but I needed the money and tend not to judge people on how they spend their free time. This case was different though. I shouldn't have been involved, and it ended up making me the suspect in a murder case. I ended up being cleared and they caught the actual killer, but I will never live that down. I was at the man's house cleaning up the yard, but found myself needing to use the bathroom. I normally don't do this, but I asked the owner if I could use his bathroom. He was more than happy to let me in. He saw no problem with it. It was while I was in the bathroom that I heard his front door get thrown open. I heard yelling, followed by 2 gunshots. I was frozen. I had no idea what to do. I ended up climbing out of the bathroom window and running to the next door neighbor's house. I banged on their door and begged them to call the police. I explained what happened, and they let me wait in their garage for the police to arrive. After surveying the scene, they informed me that the homeowner was killed and that I was the only one around when the act happened. And since I was working off the books for people, it seemed suspicious. I ended up being questioned on 4 different occasions, one of which they told me I was the prime suspect and that my number was in the owner's burner phone for some reason. I was happy to hear that they finally caught the actual killers, but I'm not going to be working off the books for anyone ever again. That's for sure. Do you know how they say that hindsight is 20/20? Well, looking back on that day, the more I think about what happened, all of the signs were there from the beginning. It was 2006. I had just turned 24 and finally got in a home for myself. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small 1-bedroom home, but it was a home, and I was proud of it. I had just graduated from college and landed a solid job at a small accounting firm, so I finally had a way to earn some money. That being said, I was still in the process of saving up, so at the time, I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck, like most people. In order to make a little bit of extra money, I was in the process of selling things that I didn't need anymore, a lot of which was being sold over CRAIGSLIST. I had managed to sell a few cheap paintings and piece of furniture that I owned on the site, so I figured it was a good place to start. I posted a few items, and it wasn't long before I had a response. Someone had emailed me about buying an old cell phone, and as luck would have it, they were able to meet that day. I didn't like the idea of meeting at my house or at their house, so I asked if they would mind meeting at a local diner. He agreed, and we were set up to meet later that day. The time came and I grabbed the phone and its charger, got in my car, and made the 15-minute drive to the diner. As I pulled in, I noticed that it wasn't as full as I expected it to be, which was nice, and I didn't think anything of it at first. But the more I tell this story, the more I realize that I noticed a white Ford Taurus parked next to a red Chevy Impala. As I said, I didn't think anything was strange about it at the time. I pulled into a parking spot that was close to the door, and I texted the buyer to let him know that I was there. He said he would be at the diner in a few minutes, so I just turned on some music and waited. After a few moments, a white Ford Taurus pulls into the spot next to me, and me and the buyer made the exchange. Everything went fine. We both said thank you and headed our separate ways. As I made my way home though, I noticed something odd. I had made a few turns along the way, and I could swear that I was being followed by a red car. Again, I made no connection to the car in the parking lot. As I got closer to my house, I grew more and more concerned that something was wrong. However, one intersection away from my house, I noticed the car turn down one of the side roads. I was relieved to make it home, safe and sound. I made my way into the house and made sure to lock the door behind me. I threw some leftovers into the microwave and got ready to settle down for the night. After dinner, I hopped into the shower and began to get ready for bed. I would have gone to sleep as if nothing was wrong had I not remembered that I left the curtains to the living room open. I don't like the idea of someone being able to see inside my house, so I went to close them. I paused when I got to the window though, because I could have sworn I saw something in the road. It was at that moment I realized that I was looking at a car that had parked at the end of my driveway. I froze. My first instinct was to look to the door, and it was still locked, thankfully. I then quickly made my way over to the light switch to the front porch, and I could see the car as clear as day. It was the red car that had been following me, a red Chevy Impala. To my horror, the car was empty. I didn't know how many people there were, or where they were, but someone was outside my house for some reason. I pulled my phone out and quickly called the police. I explained to the 911 operator what the issue was, and they assured me that someone was on the way and asked me to stay on the line. That was when I heard them, the sound of multiple people walking along my porch. I turned out my light, but it didn't scare them away. I tried to poke my head around the corner to the window without being seen, hoping that I could catch a glimpse of who was outside. To my horror, one of the men was standing with his covered face pressed against the glass trying to look inside. As soon as my head came around the corner, we made eye contact. He didn't move at first. All I could think to do was to say, "Police are coming. You better get out of here right now." I tried to sound stern, but I honestly probably sounded like a sniveling child. It was like clockwork though, and almost right after I finished my sentence, I could see the flashing lights coming down the road. The dispatcher wasn't lying. Someone was actually right down the road. The men noticed the lights and took off to their car, but they didn't make it in time. The police were in the driveway and the 3 men were taken into custody. I recognized one of them as the man who was driving the white Ford Taurus. The police said, "This sort of thing happens all of the time."
I'm 27 years old now. This happened when I was 13, my sister was 9, and my brother was 6. We were raised by our single mother. She usually worked nights on the weekends. I was old enough to be home alone, so whenever my mom was at work, I was the one responsible for my siblings. This all happened on a Saturday night. For a little bit of context, let me give you the layout of my childhood home. When you walked into the living room, there was a hallway. To the right was the kitchen, then straight ahead was the downstairs bathroom. To the left was the stairway. Once you got upstairs, the first room straight ahead was the upstairs bathroom. The first room on the right was my room, and the second room on the right was my brother's. The room across from mine was my mom's, and my sister's room was right next to my mom's. Now here's the story. Before my mom left for work, she had gave me $20 for pizza, then left. I ordered the pizza and we had a good night. About 2 hours after we ate, my sister went to the downstairs bathroom. When she came out of the bathroom though, she said that she heard someone knock on the window. I believed her and I told her that it was okay. Well, about an hour later, we heard yet another knock at the front door. I looked in the peephole and I saw a dirty looking man with long brown scraggly hair. He looked like he was homeless, but I couldn't really tell. I then began to look down and I saw that he had a knife right in his hand. I then looked at my brother and I told him to turn off the TV and all of the lamps. I told my sister to grab my flip phone while I ran in the kitchen to grab a knife. I then told all of my siblings to go upstairs. I told my brother to go hide under his bed and my sister to go hide in my mom's closet. I then hid in the upstairs bathtub. I then heard the front door smash open. It was a really flimsy old door, so it didn't really surprise me that happened. I then heard doors opening downstairs. I started to dial 911. I heard the man start to come upstairs and then heard the bathroom door open. I held one hand over my mouth while the other was holding my flip phone. Very luckily, he didn't open the shower curtain. When the man left, I had started to worry about my siblings. I then got out of the bathtub and ran out of the bathroom. I began to run full force at the guy, stabbing him a few times. Right as this was happening, the police had finally arrived. I saw him trying to run out the front door, but the police were able to catch him. I then found my siblings, and the police called our mom. My mom came home immediately. She even quit that job because of this. So yeah, that's definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while home alone, but hopefully the last.